Welcome to Moral Lit, a channel dedicated to literary discussions and deep dives where we focus on the Unseen Operative series by me, A.L. Lieske, and discuss the human condition around us. In these podcasts, we will be looking at sections from my own literature as well as the literature of others in order to elaborate on these conditions and to kind of describe things that we all relate to. We hope that you'll enjoy this podcast. Stick around and subscribe. And so today's discussion is going to focus heavily on the topic of motives, motivation, and commitments. So whereas last time we started off reading a passage in my book, we're not going to do that immediately this time, but there will be a prevalent passage or two that we will discuss. So just to kind of start off today's topic, like why talk about motives, motivation, and all that, I was on social media the other day, as most people do, and I was kind of scrolling around my author groups, and one person had posted this meme, which a lot of folks found funny, but it was essentially saying that, this is my face when I don't feel like writing or I don't have the motivation, but then I remember that these other people are signing six-figure deals with agents to be full-time authors, and then suddenly the person's all motivated to type. And that really put me off because, to me, that's a terrible reason to force yourself to write. That's a terrible reason to write. So it kind of got my wheels turning into motives, motivation, and, what makes a good motive for doing something? What is a proper motivation for getting into writing books, making videos, starting a career path, just anything in life? So I came up with 4 bad motivators and 4 great motivators. We're going to kind of talk about those, and then we're going to kind of relate that to a passage in the Lattice Scheme, my book, to kind of, draw it into the literature, what I was trying to tap in there, kind of help us look at literature in general when we read motives for things, like how legitimate are these motives, how good are they, and are these things that we are or should not be or should be reflecting in our own lives. We'll start with the first poor motive. I'll just bring up what it is, and then we'll just kind of talk about why. Give me your thoughts. So the first one is for money for oneself. Like, I want to make money. Is that a good motivation, and why or why not?
I think money can be a very good motivator, and I think it can be a very bad motivator. One of the great things about money is that it gives you money is a resource that you can use appropriately or inappropriately. It's not necessarily good or bad inherently, but the desire to acquire money just to acquire money is, it's like it says in the Bible, it's a bad thing. It's not something you should be doing because that takes away the focus from the actual purpose of the resource. It's kind of the same thing with hoarding a bunch of food or having an excessive amount of land or an extra large house or extra cars. If you have these resources, but you're not actually really using them for anything, you don't have a good set apart purpose for it, then it really starts to become the excess, right? When you overeat in excess, it harms you, it harms your body. When you overproduce something, whether your production is when you do something just for the sake of the money or just for the sake of growth, companies will buy out other companies just for the sake of growth. They'll continue to acquire to match their demands of the shareholders, which all they hope for is their investment to increase. But that often leads to many, many people in many, many ways making decisions that aren't actually best for the company. They're just best for the profits of the company. And so people get laid off of their jobs because, it helps them in the immediate, give them a boost of funds that they once were going to pay the people that they hire. But now all of a sudden it's paying out the shareholders. And, the shareholders are now happy. So what do? They give more money and, they're expecting better returns. And so it's a constant cycle of if we're buying more cars just to have more cars, if we're buying a bigger house just to have a bigger house, if we're hoarding a bunch of unnecessary products just to have things that are of, air quote value, you really start to lose the value in what you're actually doing. People will collect random stuff. I mean, it kind of reminds me of the Beanie Babies.
Yeah.
Even people like my parents who are very intelligent, and I absolutely love them, and I think they make a lot of really good decisions, both financially and otherwise. But I think it was my dad especially that thought that Beanie Babies, he was part of the Beanie Baby boom. We had a huge tote growing up full of these Beanie Babies, and the only reason why they were collected was because they would eventually hold some sort of value that you could sell for later, right? Instead of buying it for what was probably the actual reason for buying it, was just to have your kids have something to play with, or this perceived value, and then you're just wasting this resource instead of having this as just a little toy that your kids can play with. Now all of a sudden it's an investment, and because of that you treat it so differently. You have such a strenuous adult vision on this, rather than just, hey, I have something I can enjoy, and now I can't enjoy it anymore because of this money greed.
Oh man, you touched on a lot of points that honestly we could probably turn this into an hour-long podcast itself. Money as a motivator. But yeah, financially, like, the numbers itself, they don't mean anything that is necessary to your life. Do we need money to pay bills? Yes. Do we need money to be able to afford healthcare? Heck yes. Do we need money to, be able to get gifts and whatnot? Sure. But in and of itself, if your only reason for doing anything is just purely money, are you really going to get pleasure out of that thing? No. And kind of like what you've hinted on or touched upon with especially the Beanie Babies, like, it makes others around you miserable too. Your motivators do influence everybody around you. So when it's just about money for yourself, it brings you down. And that kind of ties into the second one is, fame. I want to be well known. I want to be famous. A lot of people want to be well known and they want to be famous. That's why, so I'm big on the Instagram, but you go on Instagram, you'll find these people who are only following like 700 and yet they have 2.5K followers. But if you go through and you look at the followers, half of them are these robotic accounts that they've made to follow themselves. Like, they do these things to really up their own numbers so that, yeah, they're popular, they're famous, they're quote-unquote monetized. But it's like, do you honestly think that person is happy with themselves? Do you think they actually have real friends? Or do they just have this worldly image? A lot of folks that do have a persona online are completely different in real life, and a great deal of them are statistically depressed. So to me, like, that is a terrible motivator. The third motivator for doing or not doing something is for ease, comfort, or in other words, laziness. Am I doing this thing to just avoid having to do XYZ instead? Am I picking this job so that I don't get forced into doing what someone else wants me to do? What is easy for me?
I can definitely relate to this. Even though I've had a lot of motivations for going to college, but never ended up going, some of those motivations for not going were kind of selfish, out of laziness, if you will. Not that I don't want to apply myself, but I think there's certain things that I wanted to avoid for quite some time. And it was pretty easy, especially with COVID, being ready to go to college, and then COVID shows up, and now that's an excuse. It's like, are you gonna go to college? Like, oh no, I can tell everybody, hey, I'm waiting for COVID to die down. That was my excuse. It was legitimately, that was my excuse. And I've been away from it for so long that luckily I've been blessed enough to not need it, but it's a lot easier to admit that at the time I was just looking for an escape, just to have a little bit of time to myself to kind of figure myself out. One of the great things about college is that you do learn a lot about yourself. Mm-hmm. You grow, you make connections, and I can't say that it was 100% all for good, but I will say that at the very least, it kept me where I needed to in order to meet Aubrey. So that was definitely a major blessing for that. But, there's all sorts of things that we do for the sake of this is the easier path. This is the simpler path. Take the first job that's offered to you just so that you can have a job. Do the easiest or simplest way to either make money or to shut people up if they keep asking you why don't you have kids, or why don't you people will always ask you, why aren't you doing this? And whether their standard is completely ridiculous or it's reasonable for them to ask that question, oftentimes we pick the easier answer. We try to do the easier thing, try to ease the burden of, oh man, I haven't really thought about that, but I don't want to admit that, so I'm just going to say, oh, here's my excuse.
I do have to put a little, I wouldn't say caveat so much, but just a little by way of explanation on ease. There could be the argument made that, well, some people are motivated to do something quickly to get it out of the way so that they have ease later. For example, I did go to college, so I did this. I'm not going to say guilty of doing this because for the point that I'm making, this matters. But putting in all the work to do your final project up front when you know that it's coming, so that at the end of the semester, when you're crammed with projects for other classes, you don't have that big, nasty research project still like bearing you down, like you've almost got it complete and it's just smooth sailing from there. That is technically a motivation for ease because you want it to be comfortable and better off for you later. But the point of ease being a bad motivator isn't for that, because I would rather call that being proactive. Just doing it for ease, you're proactively taking care of yourself. Like, that is one thing. But as far as ease goes, if you're continually taking the easy way out in life instead of applying yourself, pushing yourself, that habit becomes part of who you are, to the point that you spend your entire life missing out on serious opportunities of growth, of getting to know others, of doing a whole lot of good, and even discovering some incredible things about yourself, because you'd rather stay in this easeful state of yours. And I mean, just for the perspective we as Christians have is we're trying to be better people. We're trying to aspire to something higher. Hinduism and Buddhism is all about that too, especially with nirvana. Like, we're trying to be something better. So why would we ever want to put ourselves into this cyclical ease? It's unproductive. So that just a little mention on that. When we mean ease, we don't mean being proactive so that you can sanely take care of yourself later, or rest at the end of a semester, or a workload, a job, a task, any of those things. It's literally just for ease. So the fourth one that I have for poor motivators is gratification or obsession. And this is one that I get really fired up about. In the author community, there are a lot of folks on two sides, two extremes, as there always are. There is the extreme of we only read clean books kind of folks, which I am in that crowd. I'm not ashamed to be in that crowd. But then there's the other folks over there that are all like, I want these morally gray characters. I want, all this violence and death. I want all the sexual content, etc. Both extremes kind of fall into an obsession. I have seen lots of folks on, the moralistic side that are so obsessed with it that it's just uncomfortable to be around them. You can't, you feel like they're so wholly on this high spectrum up there that they can't relate to real life. And that's not true, because that's just all an online persona. But I would say it's not healthy to be on cloud nine all the time or portraying yourself as such. And then, when something hard happens to you, suddenly you can't talk about that because that's not your image. And then for the other extreme, though, these fantasy obsessions, these fictional obsessions, it's a terrible motivator. It's worse off, in my opinion, 100 times down compared to anything extremist ecclesiastically or moral-wise, because these things are fake. They're not good. Constant self-gratification is not good. Living in a fantasy world is not good. Why? Because it is not the world that we live in. You have trouble navigating and coping with everyday actual life when you're constantly doing things to put yourself into your obsession and your gratification. And we know from self-gratification, just as a human observation, regardless of where you are on the moral scale, you know that that is very fleeting. Things will, make you happy for a while, but the alcohol goes away, the drugs go away, the high goes away, whatever your high is, whether it's from substance or media or interaction whatsoever, it goes away. That is life. We are more than our bodies and these tangible things we experience and the things that we do that make our bodies feel certain ways. So to me, that is the ultimate worst motivator, because you will go from one thing to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next, never be happy, never be satisfied, never be fulfilled. And sooner or later, these things that you try on, honestly, usually sooner, they're going to utterly fail.
Yeah, it's overstimulated dopamine addiction. I struggle with ADHD, but that doesn't. And some people would say that individuals with ADHD are the only ones that struggle with that. But I think that struggle is just different. I think that type of high is just different with or without it. But at the same time, there are plenty of people who don't have ADHD or don't struggle with like a neurodivergent brain, but they struggle with a dopamine addiction. They struggle with being constantly on whatever it is, whether it's constantly on for their job, for different things going on social media, different things going on the news, which all of it I think is very dangerous, to constantly be on and never allow yourself to live in the real world and just breathe and realize that if you walk outside your front door, the likelihood that you'll be able to just stand there and nothing will happen to you. I mean, depending on where you live, but most places, especially in the U.S., where we're very, very blessed, if I walk outside my house and sit on my front porch, nothing's going to happen to me. And the fact of the matter is, I could do that for several hours. And the longer I sit out there and just take in the air and, look at the sunset or look at the sunrise and, feel the world around me just being as calm as it is, even though there are devastating, horrible things happening around, a lot of times, most of us, we don't realize that we do have it a lot better than we think we do, especially those of us in the U.S. And if we just sit down and just breathe for a moment, if you're not looking at your phone and you're just sitting around in your house and there's nobody else around, like, look how calm and peaceful your life really can be. If you just look away, stop, obsessing over things that don't matter. There are things that do matter that we shouldn't obsess over, but at least pay attention to. Not that we need to completely unplug, disconnect, and throw away our electronics and phones and social media. Some people benefit more from that than others, but for the most part, we just need to have a healthy balance.
Exactly. It's all about balance. See, the thing is that motives drive mindset. That's kind of where we're getting at here is even the most healthy things, if it becomes an obsession, if it's taken to an extreme, if it's, gratification for yourself, you get in this frenzy mindset that so many in here in the United States are in, and I know worldwide struggle with too, that, your mindset just becomes this negative, awful, unrealistic, or trapped space, and your perception of the world around you gets mucked up. Like, our motives affect everything. Our beliefs affect our motives, but we're just talking about motives today, and it affects absolutely everything. Just on a personal note, like, I struggled with an eating disorder. I struggled with an exercise disorder for a while, and doing those things constantly had a purpose in my life, a purpose of self-preservation, but the point that I'm getting at as far as motives went is it was not healthy, it was not good. Was I necessarily starving myself when I was restricting some things? Yes and no. I wasn't doing it at all to be skinny, never was, but it was restricting the other perspectives that I should have had for life, relationships, school, control, like kind of like Zach is talking about, being able to just sit and relax. Yeah, that's not a thing when you have this constant need for gratification, for an obsession, whether it's a mental illness or not. Now, mental illnesses are very frequently outside of our control. But I do not want for a minute to negate the fact that we as humans have power to overcome these things, especially with and through Christ. But we're not completely beyond help, beyond saving when we have a mental illness. There are things we can do to cope with it and to fight it and to help others through it as well. So that's not to excuse not trying to help yourself in mental illnesses. It's also not trying to say that they're on the same thing as motives, because not all eating disorders are because you have a bad motive. A lot of our motives start off good, and because of mental illness, they warp. But the point just being that motives drive our mindset, and that impacts our reality. So with that, let's take a look at some of the good motivators, just 4 that I've listed. I'm sure you can come up with thousands more. But the first one is about raising money, awareness for a cause. So this is where money can be turned good. If you're raising money for a cause, if you're trying to raise numbers of awareness for a cause, it's very different than raising money for yourself. It's different than, trying to be famous or popular. There's a bigger heart to that. When you're turned outward trying to do something that others cannot do for themselves, it's not only more successful, it's more fulfilling. It generally lasts a heck of a lot longer. It brings people together.
Yeah. Well, something that I'm pretty locked in, tuned in, I guess you could say, to a lot of what's going on YouTube. I really like a lot of different things that go on there. I also don't like a lot of things that go on there. But one thing that I really appreciate is that several YouTubers, they always try to raise money for a good cause. A really good example is Ryan Trahan. I showed my wife here a little bit of what he kind of does. And one of the things that him and his wife did over the summer was they went to every state in the U.S., so all 50 states, in 50 days. And they did that to raise money for St. Jude's Hospital. Their original goal was to raise $1 million for St. Jude. And by the time they finished, they went over $11 million in donations. And that came from a lot of small donations and quite a few big donations from different other YouTubers, other corporations, and just people who are willing to get together and do something for good. And so not only were their expectations completely blown away, but that is a great example of what money can do. And it's just kind of ridiculous how much money some people can just hold on to and decide that they don't have enough, so they have to reinvest it instead of giving it to a good cause. There comes a point where you have so much money that not even 3 or 4 or 5, some people even 10 lifetimes, 10 generations, thousands of years, legitimately, like some of these people could live off of, if they could live forever, if they lived a super humble and modest life, the billions of dollars that some people have access to, and they decide not to give it to anybody, is insane. I know not a lot of it's liquid cash, but a lot of it could be very easily, and they decide...
If they had the motive to be giving.
Yeah, if they had the motive to be giving, they could give even a small fraction of that. Some of them do, but a lot of them don't. And if they even give a small fraction of that, that could make a huge difference, given to the right cause, to the right people, where it actually goes to doing something good. And yet, so many people desire so much more than that, which is bizarre, because when you have more money than you know what to do with, that multiple generations of your children's children are legitimately set up for life and don't have to do anything. And you think to yourself, yeah, I'm just going to try and make more. Mm-hmm. That's crazy.
And that goes back to that first bad motive.
Exactly.
Insanity.
But if you could raise money for a good cause, not only are people willing to back a good cause, but you could really, really change lives or save lives. In the case of Ryan Trahan and his wife, the good they did. I can't imagine $11 million in my bank account, let alone I can't imagine how many children are actually going to be able to receive treatment and live from the good that St. Jude does, and other charities that are reputable. It's so sad to hear when a charity or an organization claims to be doing something good and they're not.
Oh yeah.
But regardless, the fact that there are people that are willing to support good is amazing. And if you have a good enough cause, you can actually do something. I mean, they more than 10x'd their original goal, and even $1 million would have done amazing. Countless lives would have been saved. It's unimaginable how much good that actually will do.
Exactly. And I'm especially a huge supporter of St. Jude's, but yeah, when we do something for others, it's a good motivator. It's more fulfilling, it's more lasting. The second one, we'll kind of keep this one a little short. Because this is being put out all over the nation right now, is trying to start a conversation or communication. So in this past month, just a couple weeks ago, we saw the assassination of Charlie Kirk, who was big on communication, debating, having conversation with others. That is a huge, phenomenally good motivator, because we as humans, I don't know why, but we stink at communication. We shy away from it. It is not easy to have a conversation in our heads. In reality, it is. It's completely simple to listen, to talk, to consider. Like, those are things we learn when we're little, very basic. But yet, in our heads, it's so hard. It's so complicated because we're so busy taking in the perceptions of what others might think of us, what we think of them, whether or not we're going to be attacked. Like, we're all so guarded nowadays that conversations are hard to be had. But if your motive is to just have a conversation, a productive conversation with no selfish agenda behind it, it's a powerful motivator. We saw Turning Point USA became huge because of that. Because it wasn't about, yes, it is a debate, and yes, they are trying to prove a point, but they didn't do it without listening to other folks. I've seen so many clips of Charlie saying, help me understand this, and there have been times that people do, like, for example, one of the recent ones that I saw was somebody who needs, sign language, American Sign Language, spoken to them, and they were talking about, how captioning doesn't always bridge that gap. And I remember Charlie was corrected on a point that he made with that person. He was really humble about it, and I was just like, that's conversation that matters right there. To be able to admit that we're wrong, we got to be able to see other people's point of view and grow from it. So if your motivation for doing something in your life is to have that collaborative conversation, communication with other folks, that is a powerful, good reason to be motivated to do something. So our third one, and this kind of goes into why I wrote the Lattice Scheme altogether, is you have a message. Messages are powerful. A lot of us feel that we are called of God to, declare things to the world. Some of us, even non-religious, you'll feel that you'll have a purpose in life. You have something that you can do, something to give, something powerful that drives you. When you have a message to share, you're willing to carry it out to the ends of the earth. Depending on what that message is, it may or may not have good effects, but the point is it's a good motivator in the sense that it lasts, it carries, and, the duration and longevity of it is so much more powerful than those poor motivators would be.
Absolutely. One thing that comes to my mind is oftentimes there's a phrase that I think is horribly misrepresented and mischaracterized. Some would say that love doesn't judge. But what that really, if you're taking the root of the language and you're actually understanding what love is and what judgment is, when you truly love and care for someone, it's hard to immediately, I I guess, blame them or find fault with them. And what people are trying to kind of portray that phrase as is that no matter what I do, you'll love me. That's what most people kind of interpret or create their meaning from. But what that really means is that when you love someone, you don't judge them, you understand them, and then when a conversation is had, you both can walk away agreeing to disagree, but understanding that at the end of the day, you are both human individuals. One of the most beautiful things about humanity is that it is very different, and it's very multicultural, and it's very unique. Every person that you talk to has very unique experiences. And there is such beauty in being able to get to know someone, especially from different cultures and different ways of life, even if at the end of the day you don't necessarily agree on certain things. But if you can bring together two individuals who you think are going to absolutely hate each other, but at the end of the day they still can walk away loving each other because you know that they are a father or a mother or a daughter or a grandmother or a grandpa, and that they do love their family. If we love our family, it's easier to love each other because we recognize that in some regard we all are family, and if we can treat each other like that properly, then we don't judge people. We don't try to point the finger and harshly criticize, because it's easy to categorize someone as one thing. We can have unifying beliefs that do bring about certain stereotypes, but until you get to talk to someone, you really don't understand the finite details and how human everyone really is. There are people that don't do good things, and they have a lot of really bad intentions, and you got to learn to be careful for some of that. You can't necessarily trust everyone with every ounce of your being, but to have an understanding that most people that you interact with at the end of the day are very much like you, and they might even have a lot of parts of you that you don't like, because you recognize that those parts are in other people, and insecurity makes us defensive, and when we're just trying to get to the end of all of our goals and all of our achievements, I think we just dehumanize people a little too much.
Agreed. So, brilliant minds think alike. There's my husband bleeding into the fourth point, which is love. Love is the most powerful, positive motivator. So yeah, messages of love, but also love. Like, I couldn't have said that better myself. That is exactly why love is a proper motivator, is bridging that gap. Mm-hmm. We're all humans, and if we could see each other less as objects, less as enemies, and more as people, what a difference that would make in this world. For the sake of time, we'll save more on that conversation for another part of my book, because love does come up in the very end of my book, as well as indirectly throughout it. But we're just going to kind of look into some motivations for some of the characters in my book, The Lattice Scheme. So for any of you who have a copy, this is on page 9. But Azure, our main character, she gets kind of recruited, or I guess she receives the opportunity to enter this voluntary program, this dream trial program, where essentially she gains her skills to be able to enter into the subconscious dreams of others. Now, that's all fictional, of course, but we're looking at her motivations for doing so, because these are really relatable motivations, and we're going to go back and forth and, scrutinize if these are good, bad, or both kind of motivations. So she only gives 2 reasons as to why she agreed to enter into those studies. Foremost was the promise of a substantial bonus on top of paid hours for the work, with full bureau responsibility of any side effect, as well as the ability to withdraw at any time. So, there's a little bit of money. And she goes on to mention that, she could use the money because she wanted to further her education for a higher position in the bureau. So money is a motive there. Second bonus is that induced measures of sleep during the study had a similar rejuvenating effect on the body and mind as a full night of rest with deep NREM sleep cycles. Azure is an insomniac up to this point, so sleep is a really precious thing to her. So just kind of looking at those two motives, money for the sake of being able to further your education and your career, and the health benefit of being able to have sleep. Are these good motives? Are they bad motives? Are they potentially both?
I think it's easy to say that it's a little bit of both. Humans aren't so black and white. The decisions we make aren't always black and white.
Mm-hmm. Especially in the moment.
We would like to think that everything we make is within our best judgment, but not always. But at the end of the day, that's for each individual to decide for themselves. Is there more good than bad? Mm-hmm. Because no matter what, every decision we make and everything we do will probably have some negative consequences. And it takes a lot of real time, effort, and research, as well as just personal reflection, to find the best possible choices we can make for ourselves, as well as choices for others, especially those of whom we love. If making this particular choice makes it that so she can get much better sleep, she feels a lot more rejuvenated, she's a lot better, and the program does produce good results, that's probably some of the biggest motivators for it, is that it could help a whole lot with her career. It could help a whole lot with her interpersonal life, her physical health, of course. The biggest thing would be to fully understand whether or not the work that's being done would actually bring a positive or negative effect on the world in general.
Exactly. So there's a very precise reason that I didn't give a whole lot of background on Azure in the book, especially on her decision there. And the reason is for us to kind of reflect on this is there's always more factors than we know. Characters are not two-dimensional. I try to make my characters multi-dimensional so that they're, relatable, realistic. We don't get to see all of Azure's motives for this, but just in considering that alone, the health aspect especially, I don't know about anybody listening, but if you've ever struggled with insomnia, if you've ever struggled with not having energy, if you've ever struggled with severe depression, which is kind of related to this, you know that life is just really difficult to get through without that energy and that focus that you need. Jobs are hard to do, it's hard to enjoy being present with others around you. It's hard to sometimes even just read something. Like you'll read a sentence and you have to go back and reread it. It's not going in. For myself, if I had known something like this was possible to, help me sleep better, man, I would jump on board with that. I was on trazodone for a while trying to help me sleep. Kind of back to our conversation last week about, the medicine label warnings. There is a risk in all the things that we take, and yeah, if it's something that we genuinely believe this is going to help me, and by helping me it's going to help me to help others, could be a good motive. That's a little bit about Azure. Throughout the Lattice Scheme, all the characters have motives, and I really want my readers to kind of consider that, even though they're not written out directly. A whole part of mystery and crime is motive. We want to know why the bad guy does what they do, right? But what about the other surrounding characters? Like, let's look at Isabel in the Lattice Scheme. She's a mother, a Filipino mother. She thinks she's trying to protect her kids. I won't go spoilers past that, but she's got a maternal instinct. And so everything she does is based around that maternal instinct. Azure comes to realize that right off the bat. Once, she has more conversations with Isabel about her family. But Isabel's decisions and choices aren't necessarily good. She doesn't make good decisions, but her motive isn't bad. So it's something to consider, that we can have good motives and make bad decisions. We can have bad motives and make good decisions. Motive does not equal, the output of your action. But it is important to consider these things because motives do matter. If you do something bad for a good reason, you're going to be judged a lot differently than if you did something bad for a stupid reason or a bad motive. So that's just kind of something to think about as, as my readers read through the book, but any books that you're reading, any, movies that you're watching, any people that you're talking to, consider motive, and consider especially your own motive, because motives matter. Okay. So just in wrapping up, we have one last thing to talk about today, and that's commitment versus motivation. And the reason that I bring this up is because motivation alone, even if it's good, it doesn't last very long. We all have days that our motivation, even if it's super good, it kind of just, spatters out. Like, I love exercising, but some days I get up and I don't feel like it. The motive is not there. Like, I do not want to lift this 35-pound dumbbell on this one side, or I don't want to lift 60 for a squat. Like, sometimes it's just not there. And we do ourselves a disfavor if we base the things that we want to accomplish in life purely off of motive. Motive without commitment doesn't last. Commitment by itself, however, is pretty much the same. You can be committed to a cause, to a purpose, but if you don't have motivation to keep up with that, you're basically robotically plowing through it. And where does that leave you in life? So, what are your thoughts, Zach, on commitment versus motivation, or commitment with motivation?
Well, I think it's often described as discipline as well. Having discipline and commitment is usually a much stronger driving force for continuing something that you may have had really strong motivations to do in the first place. But at the end of the day, if your true purpose is properly laid out, and your devotion to that purpose, if that actually means something to you, then it makes it a whole lot easier to stick with it. You don't necessarily need motivation to go to work, because most people go to work based on the very real need to, earn some money,
Survive.
and gain create that living for themselves. And so if you can find maybe not the necessarily a survival instinct all based off of every little thing you do, but if you have a strong enough discipline, and you have a strong enough commitment to the things that you say you want to do, that you feel like you need to do, then eventually it becomes one of those good habits that forms, and it gives an increased purpose. It gives an increased motivation. And most days, even if you're not feeling like doing it, you will do it because the underlying purpose behind it is much stronger than any desire to sleep in more or to just waste your time more, or whatever it may be.
Commitments and motives, they're very interconnected. But as far as storytelling goes, it's never as simple as, one plus the other, one versus the other. Like, I hope anybody reading my book takes into account, like, analyzing motives, analyzing commitment patterns, because you'll see, like, characters like Azure, very, very committed to justice, very, very committed to her career. Like, she plows through with that. Characters like Hastings, not so committed to his integrity as a bureau agent as he is to what he believes is a cause of justice. Like, we all have different commitments. We all have different motives for those commitments. Even if our motive, like, both their motives is to do justice, but their commitment to doing it is a very different way. Commitment also changes frequently if our motives change. Like, you may be committed to doing a certain program in school. You may be committed to a certain career. I might be committed to a certain job that I was in. And, sometimes things in life change and you realize your priorities are no longer aligned there. And so your motive changes, or your commitment changes. You might find your commitment wax there or wane there and then wax somewhere else. And when that happens, everything just kind of jumbles differently. It's okay to have a change in motive if that motive is good. If it's going to truly bring happiness, authenticity to you, kind of like those motivations that we talked about at the beginning. If this is something that is going to fulfill you, it's a good motive. Now make sure you have your commitment with it, because if your commitment is somewhere else, even though your motive is in this good place, but your commitment is geared towards something that isn't aligned with that, might even be opposite of that, you're going to have a lot of internal struggles. People around you are going to have a lot of internal struggles. Like, your integrity is on the line there. So what I mean to get with motives and commitment is that we as a people in society, I believe we have a duty to align our commitments and our motives to the same thing, to really be on board with that one thing, to really gear ourselves for that one thing, and to make it something that is good, meaningful. You know, if you have a message to share, put it out there, be committed to it. When the motive, like, wanes or waxes because you're human and you're just having an off day, keep committed to it. If you have the motivation but you're not committed to it, don't let it just sit in your head. Like, that's as good as doing nothing. Good intents by themselves don't mean anything. But good intents with commitment to doing them, that's power. That's how we humans have power. That's how we individuals have power. And so you'll see through my characters in the Lattice Scheme, you'll see throughout life in general, anybody who has that sort of integrity lined up, those are the people that we see as heroes. Those are those folks that we see making a difference in society, even if they're not necessarily posted in magazines, on social media, on TV, all of those things. The point is that they are aligned with themselves. I just want to thank you, Zach, for, again, joining me on this podcast, and just extend an invitation for everybody to consider those things that we've kind of talked about today. Shoot us a message. Let us know your thoughts. There's so much more that can be said about commitment, about motives, what makes a good motive, a bad motive, you know. It's never black and white, like Zach said. It's never as simple as one thing. You can have multiple motives and multiple commitments because we're human and we're not two-dimensional. So definitely let us know your thoughts. Let's get a conversation starting. And thank you for joining our podcast. Make sure you like, subscribe, check out my book, The Lattice Scheme, and hit me up on Instagram.